Morning, everyone. It's so nice to see everyone on Monday. Today's topic, Dr. Babita will cover how to integrate palliative medicine in hospice setting and how to improve quality of life. And I think this topic should be moderated by Dr. Nagesh. And as Babita is working under Dr. Nagesh, I request Dr. Nagesh to introduce Babita properly because her many good things I think I must not be knowing on personal level. So I request Dr. Nagesh to introduce Dr. Babita, and we will go ahead, and then Arun will take the questions on the priority basis at the end. Dr. Nagesh, please go ahead and moderate this session.
Yes. Thank you, President Sushma. It gives me immense pleasure and pride to introduce Babita. She has been working with us at Karnasha for more than 8 years, and very recently she took over as Associate Medical Director. She is, of course, an honorary tutor of the Cardiff University, having passed her MSc from Cardiff with distinction. And she was also honored by my Rotary Club with the Paul Harris Fellowship. Of course, she's worked both in the public and private health sector. Extremely enthusiastic, extremely dedicated. And if she goes on leave, then the decibel level in the hospice suddenly reduces. That's the sort of thing that she's all over the place and is a wonderful mentor. So, Babita, I now request you to please start your talk.
Good morning, everyone. It's a Monday morning, and the topic I'm going to talk about is end-of-life care, which is something everybody finds difficult to talk about and go forward with. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge few people who have been doing endless, have given a lot of time and effort to the work of end-of-life care in India, like Dr. Sima, who's sitting right here, Dr. Sushma, Dr. Naveen, Dr. Stan, Dr. Jeremy, and also from the critical care unit. They have also worked a lot in bringing a good policy of end-of-life care in India. So, and I would like to acknowledge Dr. Seema Rao and Dr. Lipika in helping me with these slides. So let's start. Okay. So before we start, we will be covering concepts of dying, death. In this presentation, we'll be looking at concepts of dying and death, end-of-life care, hospice care. How do we plan an integrated end-of-life care in a hospice, and how do we implement it? And what are the outcomes that we have seen so far in the last 4 years of implementing this end-of-life care? So a very difficult topic, like I said, dying and death. I mean, most of us as doctors or medical professionals, rather, we find it very difficult to even talk about dying. And even as layman, if a person dies, we don't know what to converse about, how to talk about a person who's dying or who has already passed on. What do we associate dying and death with? We associate it with suffering, we associate it with the end of everything, not a personal loss, a failure. We never think about how, when, where, or we never think about who should be there with us. Or do we always do? We are not immortals. We are we are mortals. So all of us have a day when we have to go. So associating dying as failure or death as failure is not the right way to go about. Associating it with as part of life, as a process which we all have to undergo, is the way to understand concept of dying. And that's the only way we can deal with it in a way that we will help our patients, caregivers, and even our own people. So what is end-of-life care? This is something which has been talked continuously in the last few years in all over the world, and especially in India. It's all about the care that you provide towards the last few months or days or weeks of life. And the focus of this care is all about how do you provide comfort, whether it is by symptom care or by giving support, psychosocial or spiritual support, or by just looking at making sure that the patient can die in a place where he or she chooses to. Or and the most important thing is it is a juncture of life where you are looking at something which is imminent and inevitable. That is, there's no way we can stop that, no way we can go back from it. It is a process which is going to come. It's something like this, that nobody can avoid death and taxes. So that is something like that. So if you look at layers of, we all are palliative care people, most of us are, and there are different phases of palliative care, and end of life care is a part of it. And the definition if you look at the picture here, it shows that the palliative care encompasses end of life care as well as terminal care. And it is something, if you look at the definition which is given by NICE, it says in the last 1 year of life. If you look at the definition which was given by our own ICMR, it also focuses on symptom care, comfort, and quality of life. So transition, we say that palliative care starts right at the point of diagnosis. Yes, as you diagnose a disease, you go forward with giving good symptom management, giving good curative care to a patient. You come to a point where curative care may not be possible, where you have to look at comfort, supportive care, so that the patient, even though the disease is not getting better, it is progressing, it is going into a terminal phase, you still have to look at patient in a way, and the caregiver, so that this whole group unit gets good comfort, good quality of life, and the terminal phase, which should also be comfortable, dignified. The most important aspect of end of life care is giving a dignified death to the patient, and giving the comfort to the caregiver, who is also undergoing the same suffering right along with the patient. So just a small part of this slide is the current situation in India. This is something which was done in 2008. But if you look at even now, there are so many examples each of us see in our everyday practice, where our patients are put on ventilators, not COVID. I'm not talking about COVID, but other patients who are in a state where there is no way to come. I mean, the disease is not curable. It is going to be inevitable, and the patient is into a terminal phase. Still, the patient gets unnecessary treatment, or they may get put on, and they may put on ventilators. So why does this happen? Why is this resource being not used correctly? It's mostly, sometimes it is because the doctor's unwillingness to accept that this patient is going to go into a phase where we cannot do anything more in curative phase, but we can do a lot more for patients for their quality of life. The other factors are like even the patient centered, the society. These are all aspects which stop us from from providing a good end of life care support to the patient and family. This is one of the important policies that came out in 2014, in which the Society of Critical Care Medicine and Indian Association of Palliative Care has worked and brought in. This is one of its first kind which came in India, and which actually framed the next things that came in the last few years. So as I said, I work in a hospice, and Simha sir has also explained what is hospice care. Many times people say hospice is a small a nursing home kind of thing, where you put patients who are dying. Some people say that hospice is just a place where you give morphine, Serenase, and Midas, and that's it. That's the care you provide in a hospice. But it's not hospice. Hospice means it's not a place. It's not a nursing home. It's the place where you provide end of life care, good end of life care in the last 6 months to a patient, and also support the family. It could be a institutionalized place, it could be home, it could be even a hospital. You can provide the same hospice care. There are many countries where hospice care can also be provided in a hospital. So hospice care does not symbolize a place. It symbolizes the care which is provided in the last 6 months of life. And what does it focus? It's a holistic care. Hospice care means that you are providing complete care where symptom management is concerned. You're providing support to the family. You're providing social support to the family and the patient. You are looking at, there are patients who are coming from very poor background. You need to give them some financial help. You are linking up with various NGOs, maybe even last rites. Sometimes patients are alone. They don't have caregivers, but they are very worried what will happen to them after death. So making sure that their wishes regarding their last rites and what they want to do with their body after they die, those are the things that a hospice can provide. Those are the psychosocial support, the spiritual support. There is existential crisis. Many patients, when they are coming towards the terminal phase, they face existential crisis. How do you resolve that? Those are the things that a hospice can provide, and it can be provided anywhere, be at home, hospital, or hospice. The place should be chosen by the patient and the caregiver, rather than us telling them where you want to die. You should die in this place. No, it's the choice. It's the safe choice that is made by the patient and the caregiver, and it does not end with the patient's death. It continues. There is a phase called as bereavement care, which is actually one of the most essential aspects, because we forget that after dying, after the patient has passed away, there are so many issues that the family faces. They have to come to terms with it. They have to go through their grief, and helping them through that process is also something that hospice care provides. And how is it in India? In India, like I'm from Karnataka, there are other hospices like Shanti Avedana, Sparsh, Jivodaya. There are many hospices. Can Support provides hospice at home. There are other Bill Memorial Trust. There's Pallium India. There's IPM India. There are so many organizations all over India which have, some are standalone hospices centers, some are hospices with home care, some are only home care. This is the current situation in India. But there are not many hospices or hospice-like care which is provided in hospitals. Only few hospitals may actually be equipped to do that. And one of the saddest part of our hospice care in India is that it's very, very poor where non-cancer is concerned. Most of the care is provided for cancer. Even Karnataka itself is providing most of the entire care for cancer, advanced stage cancer patients, but not for non-cancer. So there's a huge population which is missing out on good end of life care, because there are not many people who are catering to this. And the hospice care in India, actually, it's not just 6 months of life. Like if I look at my personal experience in Karnataka, we get patients who are in advanced stage of cancer. We get patients who are in not advanced stage but undergoing treatment but need good symptom management. India is basically, if you look at the resources, we are a resource poor country. So we have to provide wherever help can be provided to our patients, be it a hospital, hospice, home. So sometimes the patients we come across are not actually in end of life care. They may have advanced stage cancer, but they have 2 years to live. So what do they need? They need good quality of life. They need good symptom management. So that is also many times provided by hospices in India. The one aspect of in India is that EOLC plan, the end of life care plan that we are looking at in many centers. They are not uniform. Every center has their own plan. Every center has their own things put into that plan. There is no uniformity or uniform policy, which if we follow throughout India, we can look at providing uniform and good, efficient end of life care for our patients. There was a meeting which was held in 2016 between the International Collaborative for the Best Care of Dying and a group of professionals in palliative care from India, where they had presented an integrated plan for end of life care, wherein a document was formed, and this document was validated for use in India. So there are many centers like Karunashraya, Baptist. I think some of the centers in North have taken up this form and have started using it for their own end of life care plans. So what does this form contain? So it's basically, you're looking at assessment. The aspects of this form is assessment, communication. How do you implement this? How do you review it? And what is the outcome? The important aspect is review. Never forget that putting a patient into end of life care does not mean your work is over. Every step of end of life care is a review. Every day you review the patient. So what do you start with? You start in a plan, which is in this kind of plan, what you start with is that a discussion. The first thing is your own team, a medical team, has to recognize it. You have to make sure that the discussions between your team, whether it is a nurse, doctor, physiotherapist, counselor, everybody has to be on the same page where a patient is concerned when you're thinking of end of life care. You have to look at what are the things that you're going to plan, what are your goals of care, how will you coordinate. Sometimes even in end of life care, you will have to coordinate with a patient who wants to go home. How do you support them at home? Which nurses will you involve with the home care? Or if they want to move to another state, they want to go back to their hometown, how will you coordinate the care? And how will you provide the best quality of care that you can provide to the patient wherever the patient is? what kind of support, medical support or physical support or social support that you can give, and what kind of bereavement support, how will you help them with the certification. These are the issues and plans that you have to put in place when you are starting an end of life care plan for your patient. So like I said, how do you plan? So first and most important thing is the clinical team. You have seen a patient for a few months or few days, and you have to recognize that this person is dying. This person is at a phase where you cannot do any corrections. And that is when, once the clinical team recognizes, that is when your communication, you have to start. The important thing is you have to talk about this early. Many times many people have presented this, that the talk of end of life care, good end of life care, has to start early. It should not be right when the patient is dying. Actually, it has to start a little early, so that you build up the rapport with the patient and the caregiver, and you know what to put in place. You know what are the goals the patient has. You know what are the wishes the patient wants or the caregiver wants. And you are also prepared for the good symptom management when you are actually talking about this early, and not at the last moment when the patient starts gasping. You also have to think about what are the social supports. Like suppose a patient has a religious issue that has to be sorted out. Suppose there are many like Christians, they would like to confess. So how would you arrange, especially now in the COVID time, where you cannot allow too many people to visit patients? We are very patients are at risk. How would you manage, coordinate, and get the wishes of the patients fulfilled? And what kind of after death care? There are many times now, especially many of us are facing, is with the death certification, transport of bodies. Because of COVID, there are a lot of restrictions, lockdowns have been put in. So how do you help the patient caregiver with the legal issues, to sort out the legal issue, to get the certificate, especially if the patient dies at home? So this is all part of the integrated plan, which, if once you put in place, has to be reviewed every single day. So this is something I think all of us know about gold standards framework, and it is how you start. It is how it helps us clinicians to look at which patients can be are in end of life care, which patients, what are the needs and preferences, what are the symptoms that we need to deal with. This is something that we all follow when we are planning to put a patient in end of life care. So what are the goals? What are your goals of end of life care? Are you trying to relieve the suffering? What is the suffering? Are we only talking about pain management, or are we talking about the other suffering, the spiritual suffering? There are many patients who have fear of death. You see them, they become very agitated, they become very restless, they're constantly talking about that. There are two aspects of it. There is a patient who will tell you, just give me an injection and kill me. And there is this patient who will tell you that I do not want to die, please save me at any cost. That is also suffering. We cannot just put suffering in the terms of symptom management or pain management. It is also the suffering that an individual goes through when he or she is facing their death. So how will you support that suffering? How would you prevent that suffering or relieve it? Can you relieve pain 100%? I don't think we can relieve any symptom 100%. There will be many times you'll be able to get 70 to 80% success. But how do you explain to the patient and the caregiver what you are doing and why you are doing it? How are you going to help the patient? Communication. Dr. Simha is right here, and he is the god of communication. So communication, very, very important. Start early. Talk to them. What are you expecting? What can they expect? Especially if a patient is at home, you are providing end of life care at home. There will be many situations where the caregiver would not know what to do. If you have a huge ulcerated wound on the leg, right, sitting and right on top of the carotid, you are expecting a carotid blowout. What would you how would you help the attender? If the patient you believe will go into unconsciousness gradually, how will you explain that? What is happening to the patient? What are the changes in the body? This is also part of the communication. How do they deal with it? How do they face the part where their patient, their loved one? For us, he or she may be a patient. For them, it's a loved one. That their loved one is going through a phase where after some few days they may not see them again. So what to expect? How to cope? What are their coping mechanisms? How do you support them? That entire section forms the part of communication. Maintaining human dignity, very important aspect, and it has been stressed from the time palliative care has been started. The main reason for starting, one of the main reasons was maintaining human dignity. We see so many slides, we see so many pictures where patients are dying in absolute suffering, alone, not being supported. Giving a good death, giving a pain-free, symptom-free, a good quality of death also helps in maintaining good human dignity. That's the dignity of the patient. Giving dignity to the caregiver, understanding their problems, understanding their concerns and issues, what they are going through. That also having a listening ear. Many times when patient attenders call me after death, after their loved one has passed away, the one thing they do is they thank me for listening to what they were trying to tell. It's important that you listen. It's important that you help them understand uh, what is happening to the patient. It's important sometimes not to talk anything, just to be silent. And wishes, we cannot be paternalistic and tell them that I am I the doctor or you are the doctor. I am the medical person, I know best. No, that is not it. You have to respect the patient's wishes. Many times in Karnataka, we see that when the patient is almost about to die, the caregiver will come and tell us that please let us go home. We would like the patient to go home and die. Some of it is because of the religious concerns, like Hindus, that they should die at home. That is very important for them, that their life should go at home. In Karnataka, there is a thing that if a person dies outside the village, they will not allow the body inside. So these are concerns that caregiver and patient has. So you have to respect those concerns. Sometimes the patients would like to go home and die so that they are surrounded by everybody they want there with them. So these are the wishes that you have to comply, and you have to help them, and you have to support them. And bereavement support. It is also important in India. Many times we say that bereavement is not needed because there's a good family structure, but there is a really good family structure. But also the thing is that many times these patients, these caregivers, though their family structure is very good, they're not able to talk about what they are undergoing. Maybe because they're very close to the family and they don't want to share what suffering they are undergoing. And we have found that people who are having difficult grief, they many times keep quiet, they don't tell anything. So it's very important that even after the patient dies, you support them, you call them up, ask them how they are doing, what's happening in their life, how they are going forward with their life. And that's the only way you can pick up a person who is undergoing difficult grief. What are the requirements? Like we said, in the International Collaborative for the Best Care of Dying came out with, helped us with a document which was validated in India. Dr. Jeremy, Dr. Naveen, they have done a lot of work in validating that document, and which is being used in Karnataka Baptist for hospice, hospital, and home care. These documents are validated for these three settings. And these are the documents which are being currently used for initiating an end-of-life care plan for patients in hospice. So this has two sets. There are several sets to this document. The first is the recognition part. The second is what kind of symptoms are you looking at? Are the caregivers being explained about what is happening? Are there any issues that the caregivers would like to share? Have you put in any kind of syringe driver or a 24-hour infusion, or are you giving bolus injections? Are you looking at all the symptoms? Which are the additional symptoms that you would look for? Is there any oxygen support? Is there any blood test or antibiotic or any intervention that you're planning to do? Is there a cardiac, even the aspect of pacemakers has been covered, the CPR which will be done, what kind of fluid or any IV fluids or any NG feeds that you will be giving during end of life care, or whether you do not want to give it. It also has this entire section wherein you are giving an information about what kind of information has been given, whether a leaflet has been given, how the body has the caregiver been explained about what will happen after the death. Are there any arrangements made? So this is a completely integrated form in which every aspect of end of life care has been, they have tried to cover the entire aspect. Having a document is not enough for us. It is also important that we have staff who are trained to recognize, trained to initiate, and trained to review these forms and review these patients every single day. And the support groups. So in Western countries, there are bereavement support groups. In India also recently, some of the bereavement support groups have been started. There are for an example, here in Karnataka, once a person in end of life care dies, or even before dying, we will talk to the caregiver about what are the funeral arrangements you want to make. Where do you want to take the body? Right now in COVID times, it's very difficult for people to take the body to another state. There are a lot of restrictions. So we advise them not to do that. We advise them what is the easiest way for them to go forward. Where do they get the crematorium? Where is the crematorium? We will provide them with ambulance numbers. We will provide them with the crematorium details. Even in fact, we will even book the crematorium sometimes for the caregivers. So this is the support system that has to be there for you to put a patient into end of life care. It does not mean that you have filled a form and that is it. That does not get your over. Form is only a small part of your end of life care. It is what comes into the form and how you follow through with it that matters. And very, very important is self-care. Now, always remember that end of life care is one of the most difficult and heart-wrenching part of the care that you will give for your patient. As doctors, nurses, or as any medical professional, many times you will get to a certain extent, you try to maintain your objectivity, but the nature of palliative care is that you get involved with the family. So you would personally get involved. And we have, as a team in Karnasha, I have seen several times that they get involved with the families and they are as devastated with the patients dying as a family member is. They are taking 24/7 care of this patient. So how do they have to take care of themselves? How do you take care of yourself? How do you get yourself out from the situation wherein you have seen a person you've cared for last few weeks and the patient has died? Now you can talk to your colleagues. We have put in place wherein there are two people who are involved in, wherein you can go and talk to them whatever you are facing and how do you cope with this. So self care is as important as caring for the patient and family. Unless and until you are all right, you will not be able to care for others. So we come to the important aspect, that is, as clinicians, what do we need? As clinicians or as nurses, those who are working in the wards with the patients, those who are working in home care with the patients, those who are working in hospitals with the patients, what do you need? First and foremost is, please remember, before you put a patient into end of life care, always look at all the reversible causes. Once you have ruled out everything that is reversible, then you look at what are the other symptoms you are seeing. So many of us know that profound weakness, fatigue, semi-conscious, drowsy, unable to intake food or only sips. One thing I always remember that Dr. Simha says is that first thing to go is food. When a person is dying, first thing they let go of is food. They start reducing their food intake. They may go on to little bit of sips of liquids, or they may not even take anything. Pale, cachexia. We have what you call as fluctuating vitals. So the BP will be low. Many times they go into hypoglycemia. These are some of the features that are seen in patients who are going towards end of life care. What are the symptoms that you see? You see pain, breathlessness, secretions. See, one thing about pain is many people think that once a patient is unconscious, there is no, or semi-conscious, there is no pain. And that is a wrong thing. Many times we stop pain management because the patient is unconscious, does not need it. But that's again wrong. There are patients who are actually in pain, but because of their mental status, they're not able to tell us. So it is very important that you correctly assess and review pain at every point of end of life care. Breathlessness, secretions, and secretions are it's more terrifying for the caregiver who's seeing it, especially at home. I get panic calls at night and saying that the patient I can hear a loud sound coming from the chest. What do I do? So if you tell them what has to be done, they will be able to understand what's happening. For them, sometimes when the patient is gasping or when the patient is having a lot of secretions, they are suffering. They are seeing that suffering of the patient and they suffer right along with it. Malignant wounds, pressure sores. How do you deal with it? Do you stop dressing pressure sores because patient is dying? No, you continue them. Catastrophic events. So carotid blowout, femoral. Many of the doctors would have seen carotid blowouts and femoral. They are terrifying for the medical staff to see the amount of blood that comes out. So imagine what happens to the family when they are at home. So you have to look at these symptoms. Last hours of living. What happens in the last few hours? Sometimes high grade fever is there and we end up treating them with antibiotics. We need not do that. There can be restless, agitated patient. There can be an unresponsive patient, the death rattle, like I spoke about, the secretions, massive bleeding. These are things that you have to recognize in the last days or last hours of living. What are the goals of care and end of life care? So first and foremost goal is, whenever a patient comes in, we tell that the most important thing is control, good symptom management. If you do good symptom management, then only you can do good communication. If a patient is in pain, the patient is not really willing or in a state to talk to you or to even communicate. So first and foremost thing is to make sure that the patient's symptoms are reduced so that the quality of life because of pain or breathlessness does not come down. You are trying to make them feel comfortable. Nursing care. Home care, many times at home, we send patients home because they require only nursing care and they are comfortable at home. Even if they are unconscious or semi-conscious, they are more comfortable at home. After all, home is the best place for anybody. So what do you need in nursing care? You need good monitoring, you need good care. Many times patients come from hospitals and the oral care is very poor. Why? Because we forget to look into the mouth. It's one of the taste, even though they are not taking much, they would like to actually taste food. Even if they are in end of life care, they are comfortable, they are conscious, they would like to taste food. So having good oral care actually makes for good quality of life. Good bed care, massages, making sure that the patient has passive range of movements in the bed. Good monitoring, whether they are in pain, they are having breathlessness, whether a patient is being moved side to side, whether patient's psychological condition is good. This is all part of nursing care. Caregiver care, we talk about palliative care involves saying that caregiver is equally important as patient. So caregiver care, and it is the end of life care is the most important aspect where caregiver needs extra care, where they have lot of issues, where they have lot of uh, problems which they are facing. Their concerns about the care being given to the patient, how they will manage the patient, what will happen to them after the patient dies. Place of dying, and this is one part which has been covered in the end of life care form, and that is where where does the patient want to die. Sometimes when we are in home care, we see that patient is severely breathless and we don't have the, what do you say, the resource to provide them good symptom management at home. We are not able to provide them, especially now in COVID, getting an oxygen concentrator is even more difficult. Getting an oxygen cylinder has become quite impossible. The situation is improving now, but it has been a phase where it was very difficult. Such patients, maybe you can talk to them and advise them that maybe for a short period, come to the hospice, get settled, get comfortable, and then maybe we can look at sending you home again. So this is place of dying has to be a place where the patient feels secure, comfortable, communicate with the patient. So we always tell patient attenders or caregivers here that hearing goes last. So even if your patient is comfortable or is unconscious, please talk. Don't stop talking to them. Maybe sometimes play music, maybe sometimes read a book to them. They may not be conscious, but somewhere they understand or they recognize the voice that they are hearing. So communicate. Don't stop talking to the patient. Review, very, very important. Every aspect of end of life care, review is the most important aspect. I have seen patients here who have been brought out of EOLC and they have gone on to live for some time because review is important. It's not a death sentence. Liverpool care pathway mostly failed because people started thinking that that's it. When you put a patient on, and though the clinicians were doing the right job, but it ended up being that once a patient is put on end of life care, there is nothing more to do. There's no going back. No, it's not a death sentence. Every time you review and you reassess the patient. Imminently dying. So continuing with the goals of care, if a patient is imminently dying, like I said, good symptom management, good pain management, continue the communication. What treatments will you withdraw? Will you give IV fluids or not? Will you stop IV fluids? Will you remove Ryle's tubes? These are questions that come in for everybody, that if a patient is imminently dying, shall we continue with the Ryle's tube fluids or shall we remove the Ryle's tube fluids? Shall we give IV fluids or shall we not give IV fluids? Many times in India, we end up giving rights to feeds and IV fluids because it's a social concern. The caregiver is worried. They come to you crying that my patient is not taking anything. He is hungry. How can you not give anything? So sometimes it's just for social reasons that we end up putting 1 pint of IV fluid or we feed patients. So it is important that we communicate to them why it is not needed, what patients requirements are at that point of time. And it's only through communication that you can help them understand that overloading a patient with IV fluids is not a good idea, or giving too many free feeds will result in aspiration. What happens to the patient? You have to facilitate the communication between family and care, between patient and caregiver. Why? Because there are a lot of things that people don't resolve. As human beings, we have a lot of regrets in life. I don't know whether there's anybody here who does not have a regret in life, but many people do have regrets in life. Many people do have unfinished business in life. So how do you facilitate them to follow through? So we had a patient who wanted to see her sister she had not met for 10 years. Sister was somewhere in Kerala and patient was in Bangalore. How to bring that forward when they were not talking to each other? How to facilitate that communication? And patient would not believe, patient was in gasping for almost 2 days till the sister came and saw her. So these are things that if you facilitate may actually improve the quality of dying for the patient. And palliative sedation, one of the very important aspects and very fearful aspect for all the doctors. If we put on sedation, they will say that we are giving euthanasia. It's a last option. It's only an option when you have ruled out everything else and you cannot, there's an unrelenting symptom which is not being covered by regular medications. You are not able to manage it. That's the only place where your palliative sedation comes in. I have patients who have told me, there was a patient who had migrated back from Australia, and she very expressly told me that when I go into end of life care, please make sure that I don't suffer. If you have to put me on palliative sedation, she was an educated patient, so she was very clear about what she wanted. She said, if you have to put me on sedation, put me on sedation, but do not let me suffer. If I am unconscious, it's all right, but I don't want to suffer. So she was very clear about what she wanted to do at a point where she did not want to suffer. So these are things that you need to explore, and you can only explore if you talk to the patient. You would not be able to do anything if you don't talk to the patient and caregiver. So again, communication becomes important. So the EOLC, I have put it in a way, it is a continuum of care. It is not a phase where it ends, the care ends. It's a phase where you identify, assess, plan, provide, reflect, and you review each step of this end of life care. You are reviewing. What are you looking at? Relief. You're looking at reviewing the protocols. You're reviewing the medical charts. So patients are on atorvastatin. So you need to put those patients, continue those patients on atorvastatin. Patients are on ecosprin, on antihypertensive, on anti-diabetics. Do you need to continue these medications? Is this going to make a difference to the patient's comfort level? So you have to keep reviewing your medical chart. You have to stop unnecessary investigation. So you needn't do CBC and electrolytes every time you feel there is an issue. If you have ruled out all the correctables, you can stop doing your investigations. And what are the, like I spoke, IV fluids, hydration, food intake. These are things that you have to review. Meeting patient family request and reviewing and reflect on patients. What have we done? Even after the ULC is over, even after the patient has passed away and you are still doing bereavement care, what have we done? Reflect on the end of life care that you have provided. Did we do everything all right? Was there something more that you could have done for this patient? Is there something more you can still do for the caregiver? So review and reflect are an important aspect of end of life care, and that is the only way you will be able to provide efficient and effective end of life care, even for the patient you are treating now and the patients who are going to come in future. So outcomes, what we have seen in Karnashraya in the last few in the last few years of putting patients on end of life care, good symptom management. Yes, we have been able to provide. I can say that many people who have come through us, who have been on, and we have gone through end of more than 2,000 patients have been put on end of life care in the last years of our starting ULC plan. So we were able to achieve good end of life, good symptom management for these patients, even if the patient was at home or in hospice. We have provided, to an extent that we have provided pre-filled syringes of midazolam, haloperidol, or morphine, or even patches, how to support. Home care has gone in and put in oxygen for the patients, has put in fact, sometimes on request from caregiver, we have even gone in and put in IV lines so that they would like to put some fluid. Always, of course, always after communicating with the caregiver about why it is not needed, but if why it is needed, why it is not needed, how much you can give. So good symptom management, that has been one of the best outcomes that we have seen. Comfortable patient. So I don't know whether you see a lot of news coverage wherein after a patient dies, the medical fraternity, there's a lot of violence against medical fraternity, and we are all distressed by it. So one of the things that I have seen in Karnashraya is I have never seen violence, probably because we are preparing, probably because these patients are coming towards end of life care. But as a doctor who has worked in government setup or in private setup, in last few years before I joined Karnashraya, I saw that communication was not an important aspect. Communication was not something we were doing too much. So a good communication which starts early will help you give a lot of comfort to the patient. And towards the end, whether it is symptom management, whether it is existential crisis, whether it is psychosocial issues. So we had a father here who was very much distressed during the end of life care. He would not sleep. He would keep walking up and down because he was the only caregiver and he was the only earning member of the family. He was worried what would happen to his daughter, who was studying in a good school. What would happen to her after he dies? Who would provide for her schooling? Who would provide for his wife? Who would take care of his family after he dies? So we had to link up with an NGO. It's only after these things were put in place that the patient became comfortable, and his death was also comfortable. He actually went home, stayed with his family, and he died at home. So this is what you call as a comfortable patient. Efficient communication, of course, part of being. So what we looked at was that all the patients who were put on end of life care, we kept communicating with them from the day one, and even after death. So we had caregivers coming to us and daily reviewing with us what is happening. Is the patient all right? What can we do? How do we cope? And many times in other places, I have seen that once the patient dies, we talk only about the patient to the caregiver. We do not talk about the caregiver to the caregiver. We do not talk about what they are undergoing. What is their satisfaction? What do they want? Part of it, we recognized while interviewing our caregivers was that many of them were worried what would happen to them. How would they go on with life, especially financial concerns. If the patient was the earning member, the spouses would have financial concerns, saying that financial concern that how will I cope? How will I make sure that my family has 2 square meals to eat? How would I go forward with life? How would I teach my children? So these are things that caregivers also have concerns. One of the concerns that I came across with the caregivers was that, with the family and patient and caregiver, was that whether they will forget, others will forget my themselves tell that after I die, will my caregivers remember me? Will I be forgotten as I am dead? That is it. I am not no more important in their life. So even caregivers, especially children, wives, they also talk husbands. They also talk about, like, will my children remember my wife? Will my children remember my husband? Will they continue to remember him in good way, or will the memories be all bad? So these are, you have to talk to caregiver about caregiver also. Their comfort also, dignified and good death. Yes, that's one of the things that we were able to a certain extent, to a great extent. In fact, I should say that we were able to provide a good and dignified death to our patients. They were symptomatically comfortable. The caregivers were able to stay with them. They were able to die in a place of their choice. So this forms a part of dignified and good death. Bereavement support, like I said, we have to look at a support which happens after death. We have to look at identifying risk caregivers. So I'll give you 2 examples. The first patient would be something. First example would be a wrong something which we have to deal, which we learned from and dealt with. So we had a 98-year-old patient who had only a grandson as a caregiver. Grandson was a chronic alcoholic. So 2 days before the patient died, the grandson came, cried to the patient, and went home. The next day, we came to know that he had committed suicide. So where did we fail here? Did we not recognize that the grandson's need for the issue? We realized when we reflected and reviewed the case, we realized that we were not able to get the grandson for any communication. Because even when we went for home care, grandson would always be in a state, in a drunken state. We were not able to talk to him. And when we actually were able to talk to him, it was too late. We could not communicate effectively with him. So what was put in place? So next time, with this experience, what we started screening caregivers for suicidal intentions. So, and we were able to catch 2 or 3 caregivers who had so much attachment to the patient that they were contemplating suicide after the patient dies. So we were able to get them across to a psychiatrist to deal with this, to deal with their suicidal intention, to deal with depression. We were able to identify at-risk patients so that we can give good support to them. There were patients, there was another caregiver, which would be an example of good dealing in a good way about caregiver concern, bereavement support. So this lady was very attached to the mother, and she could not go forward in life. She had given up her job for taking care of her mother. She had separated herself from the rest of the family, and she was always with her mother, continuous 24/7. She was not able to even do work from home, especially during this COVID time. And after the mother passed away, she had logged her, but we knew that this was an issue. So she was in constant contact with me, or with my counselor, with our counselors. And we realized that she was locking herself up in a room and not able to communicate. So our counselor started regular conversations with this patient, with this caregiver, with this daughter. And we were able to again make sure that she goes and sees a counselor or a psychologist for counseling about what happened to her mother and how she should go forward with her life, how to deal with what has happened to her mother. And today I'm very happy to say that she's in regular touch with us. She has improved. She has joined a new job. She's going out with friends. So this is something only if you do good communication, you will be able to identify not just the patient's issues, but also the caregivers who are at risk. And it's an important part of providing support to the caregiver. And effective management of resources. How will you distribute your resources to patients who require, like IV, simple resource, IV fluids? Would you give it to all the patients would you give it to the patient who's in end of life care, who's almost dying? Would you give RT feeds? Would you put in an RT for a patient, Ryle's tube for a patient who's almost dying? Is it needed? How would you use the hospice setting or a hospital? Will you keep the patient who's in end of life care, who has good symptom control, who can be given good symptom control at home? Will you keep that patient continuously in the hospice? How will you use your resources effectively so that the best resource can be used in a good way for all the patients and you have equitable distribution? So these are the outcomes that we have seen by putting patients on end of life care and having good communication and having an integrated plan. And I think everybody knows the statement about giving good, patients you matter because you are you and you matter to the end of your life. We will do all we can, not only to help you die peacefully, but also to live until you die. So living, it does not mean that you are in end of life care. Your patient is in end of life care or imminently dying, means that's it. They stop living, because they are not the only person. It's a unit. It's a unit of caregiver. It's a unit of patient. So you have to help them live until the last moment they breathe. Thank you. Is there anything? Can I stop sharing my slide?
Yes, you can stop sharing, Babita.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Very nice presentation. There is only one question from Dr. Preeti. I will read out. So it is about what more can be done. See, 85-year-old bedbound breast cancer patient post-COVID, reduced amount of feeds, frail, but conscious, and she keeps asking when she will be able to walk. So communication is being done. So what else can be done? That is the question.
So one thing is that many times it's that if a patient is bedbound, they are restrained to that bed, having them take them out in the sunlight. See, we realize that when a patient is inside on a bed and in a same place continuously, they also get frustrated. It's not just about, yes, walking is an important aspect, but start by slowly taking them out. If wheelchair is possible, taking them out on a wheelchair, or moving the bed. If you have a hospital bed, what we do for patients here who keep asking that, can I walk? And this is a question that comes every time. Can I walk, doctor? I have not been able to walk. And they may have spinal cord compression. They are completely bedbound, paralyzed. In fact, quadriplegic patients. The question is very common, that can I walk? So start by at least taking out the patient in the sunlight, keeping them, maybe if you have a balcony, if you're living in a flat, if you can just face the bed or move the bed from the place they are to a place where there's a lot of sunlight, making sure that they come into the hall where TV is there and they can talk and they can watch TV if possible, and slowly to help them realize the limitations that they are having. It's only when you help them, yes, communication is the only way that you are going to help them realize what are the restrictions that they have, how much they can go forward, how much we can help them. May not be walking, probably wheelchair mobilization. That is what we can do. Even sometimes, even that is not possible, maybe the bed movement. So once they're able to come out of that place where they're stuck on the bed, that helps. In fact, even doing that much will help them understand that walking is not possible, but at least I can go out in the sunlight. Maybe I can see TV. So maybe organizing some activity will help. Does that answer the question?
I think it does.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Arun.
Yeah. No, Stan wants to add something. I think Stan wants to say something.
Thank you.
I think Lulu ma'am has asked something.
No, but let Stan give his comments, and then you can answer Lulu. Yes. No problem.
Stan sir has been spearheading the EOLC movement in India, I think.
Thank you, Babita. That was a very excellent, comprehensive cover, of a difficult topic, end of life care, difficult for all of us. couple of things I just want to add, to what you said. One is about Project India, because I think everybody should be aware of something called Project India, under which all this development has happened, and under Project India, as an alternative for syringe driver, you have the intermittent bolus 4-hourly injections, and that is part of the documentation, because that is more practical and relevant for many places. Only few places will have syringe driver, but not every place will have. So, those two important things are important, because if you want, especially if you're sending a person to die at home, then what happens? So then the best way is to give them a combination of medicines and the same 10 ml syringe, and they can be easily taught how to do that. Thank you. That's all.
Yes. So for these patients, we usually use pre-filled syringes. We teach them how to give sub-Q injections. So that is something that we are doing for patients who are imminently dying, and we know that they will have distress at home. So that is what we are doing. I think Lulu ma'am has also asked something about spiritual. Yes, ma'am. We actually encourage visits from priest or from Maulvi. There are areas where the Maulvi has come in, sat with the patient. They have chanted or they have prayed. There are priests which have come for giving last rites, like the last communion, or there's also the temple priest the Hindu priest who has come in to give the tulsi water and pray for the patients. Also, sometimes there are specific requests, so we also try to fulfill, like their body should be the ashes should be put into a certain river. In Srirangapatna, there was a request that came in from patient. Dr. Sima also knows about it. So we linked up with an NGO to take the ashes from Bangalore to Srirangapatna so that the ashes could be.
Babita, it was that the lady wanted to be cremated in
Srirangapatna, yeah.
Not just ashes. So that NGO took the body, at no cost to us. And more importantly, they communicated to the patient that we will fulfill your wishes. And that kind of helped the person to pass on a little easier, I think.
Yes.
There was a question on constipation, Babita.
I think by mistake I answered it to you. So constipation is something you have to look at on a regular basis, even in an unconscious patient, because that can cause patients a lot of pain if constipation is not addressed. It's a natural aspect when they are on fluids and everything, but maybe it's not that daily you have to give an enema, or if they are on Ryle's tube feeds, you have to give Crimafin. No, not daily. Maybe if the patient is only on sips of water, you can give it once in 3 days. You have to look at whether the bowel movements are happening or not. But it is important that all the regular habits are maintained, especially where you can look at from caregivers. You would not believe so many caregivers have called me only I have received call at 10 o'clock at night because patient has not passed motion for 3 to 4 days. So it's something which they actually are very concerned about. So that is something we assess on a regular basis. Lulu ma'am, yes, having a spiritual visit is not just based on patient's request, but it's also a part of regular end-of-life care. So we actually talk to patients about it, caregivers and patients about it. It's not just on patient's request.
If I can also add this, Babita, if I understand what Lulu said, is that we do not prescribe a thing saying, okay, now you need to meet the priest or you need to meet so-and-so.
Yes.
The request has to come ultimately from the patient or from the family member. We do not prescribe, spiritual care. Like there are institutions where a priest will go around or a pandit will go around and, bless everybody. We do not allow that because from past experience, it has been very distressing for some people. In fact, at one stage, there was a calendar with some religious thing and a couple of patients felt very uncomfortable. So visit by a spiritual counselor is encouraged, is offered only at the express request of the family member or the patient. And more importantly, whoever comes will go and see that person only and go out of the hospice. They do not then take a walk around and try and bless everybody else, because we are very, very clear that we want, do not want to in any way upset anybody. Then there is a question from Meenakshi regarding the collusion and end-of-life care. Babita, would you like to?
Yeah, actually, there is a lot of collusion, especially if a patient is conscious towards the end of life care. Many times the caregivers come and tell us, don't tell the patient that they are dying. But when we realize that if you look at your own self and you realize that your body is failing, these patients are actually aware about what's happening. And most of the time, the patient themselves will tell us, doctor, I think I don't have much time. They tell us, not us. If not us, they will tell to the counselor. They will actually express that they feel that they don't have much time. And it's something that you need to tell the patient. You don't have to tell the patient, okay, you are dying. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about conversation or communication. What we're talking about, what the patient is feeling and what the patient wants to talk to you about. There are patients also who will tell you, don't talk to me about anything. I don't want to know. My son is there, you tell everything to him, or my daughter, I don't want to know anything. So you have to respect what the patient wants. If the patient doesn't want to know, then the patient doesn't want to know. But if the patient wants to know, it is your duty that you make sure that you, and responsibility to, and make sure that the patient understand what's happening, what is going to happen, how you will deal with it, how you will make the patient comfortable, how will you help their caregiver. So all of these points are important.
There's a question on end of life care for extreme respiratory distress from Dr. Badani.
Yes, so we do use a lot of morphine and see, there are many aspects. Some of it is like when a person is in respiratory distress, the immediate question that comes from the caregiver is, are you going to put on oxygen? That's the one question that comes up. Many times these patients actually may not need oxygen, but some amount of adjustment in their medications, giving good non-pharmacological help, making sure that there are enough ventilation, the loose clothes are being worn, the posture is adjusted, giving nebulizations, giving morphine, sometimes putting a patient on an infusion of morphine and even midazolam to make sure that the respiratory drive comes down. We provide all of this not only in the hospice but also at home. We don't, like Stan sir said, syringe drivers are not always available and they are quite expensive and very few in number, so we cannot provide syringe drivers at home. So what we do is we put a sub-Q line in and we show the patient when to give, at what point to give which injections, and we monitor them continuously through phone calls or through home care, visiting them quite regularly. So this is how respiratory distress is managed. Always understand that you will not be able to reduce the distress 100%. It's the most reasonable reduction that you can achieve, and how much more you can make the patient comfortable. Also, anxiety, you have to understand that these patients will be in a lot of anxiety. So you have to you have to help understand, or why this anxiety has come in. Is it existential crisis? Is it fear of dying? What is causing this anxiety? Because anxiety will drive the breathlessness more. So you have to make sure that you are also addressing the anxiety. So these are it is a comprehensive thing. It's non-pharmacological, pharmacological, and also psychosocial. All these things have to be addressed when a patient is in extreme breathlessness.
Thank you very much, Babita, for an awesome talk. If I praise you, they will think that, because you're my girl, right? But I think it has been really, really very comprehensive. And I'm very happy that you did not show me the PowerPoint before. Okay, so that I enjoyed this talk much, much more. And I'm sure that if there are any more questions that anybody has, then they're most welcome to email you, and we'll be more than happy to take it forward. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a good week, and God bless all of you.